Call Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr Speaker, I think this is going to be one of the debates and one of the bills that I will remember most from my time in Parliament, not only because it's such an important piece of legislation for my home city, but also because of the remarkable degree of collaboration, negotiation and, in the end, consensus which has been generated for the benefit of the people of Christchurch. I want to clear one thing up at the very beginning of my speech, because in my first reading speech I said New Zealand First would vote for the bill to go to the Select Committee, but subject to a change to section 82(3), which said when determining the amount of compensation for compulsory acquisition of land, the Minister must have regard to the matters in subsection 4, but is not limited to determining the amount of compensation on that basis alone, and may determine whatever amount the Minister thinks fit. We in New Zealand First thought those words, whatever amount the Minister thinks fit, were far too wide, and they have now been deleted. And so there is now no impediment to New Zealand First looking at the bill as a whole and supporting it. And consequently, we have scrutinised the bill and we've looked for a process that would deliver our 7 bottom lines. And they were: 1, to ensure the process for initiation would be locally led and not Crown dominated, but would of course protect Crown interests. Secondly, would give the City Council and ECAN the right to be fully consulted. Thirdly, would give plenty of opportunity for public input. Fourthly, would not be secretive but be open and informative. Fifthly, would seek to enhance the environment and/or residential values of the city and/or the red zone, not just to facilitate a sell-off of the Crown land. 6, would ensure a much speedier process and progress than had so far been evident, but without compromising the collaboration needed between all of the parties. 7thly and lastly, would bring the public with the parties through good communication. And I'm very pleased to say, Mr Speaker, that I think that the bill, as it is to be amended by the Minister's SOP, will get very close to delivering substantially on all 7 of those bottom lines. And so that means that it will be a pleasure for New Zealand First to be able to vote in favour of the bill. And I want to say, as others have, that I'm especially pleased that Minister Brownlee brought us and other parties into the process of amending the bill through that SOP. His willingness to listen and to change things did produce, in the end, a consensus. And so I and New Zealand First appreciate the Minister's efforts to involve us, and we also appreciate the opportunity that we had through that process to hear what the Labour and Greens had to say, and also what the Mayor of Christchurch had to say. The Minister's SOP to be debated more comprehensively at the committee stage means much more public information and opportunity to comment, and to have that input genuinely considered and reported on. It also means a much better process for the initiation, consideration and approval or revocation of regeneration plans. And Regenerate Christchurch is to be the primary body to initiate, lead, review and advise the Minister on those plans. And it's a genuine partnership, because Regenerate Christchurch will have 3 Crown directors, 3 City Council ones and 1 representing Ngāi Tahu. But I would have to say, Mr Speaker, that legislation can only go so far. So that board must provide firm leadership and must be bold in what it proposes and must explain it well to the people of Christchurch. It must take the people along with it. And so we must have faith in it, so must the people of Christchurch. I hope they will, given the consensus which has been possible so far. Mr Speaker, without trying to preempt the committee stage, I want to mention some of the most important provisions and changes that have been agreed and which led to New Zealand First supporting the bill as it will be amended. And one is clause 12A1 and 12A3C. Those are important changes because only Regenerate Christchurch can now be a proponent for the red zone plans and may be a proponent for the Christchurch district plans, as may, of course, the other strategic partners be as well, including ECAN and Ngāi Tahu. Clause 13A2 ensures that statements to the Minister on the views of other parties on an outline plan must now be made public on the internet. And there are also similar requirements in the new clause 20A concerning the views of parties to an approval of a draft plan. It's very important that the public be properly advised in that way. Clause 18.2 requires the Minister in approving or declining an outline plan to, quote, have particular regard, close quote, to the views of Regenerate Christchurch and the other partners. And those words are repeated elsewhere for approvals of final plans and for revocations. And, Mr. Speaker, those are very important words to limit the executive power of the Minister and preserve the credibility and leadership functions, especially of Regenerate Christchurch and also, of course, the two councils that will be involved as far as Christchurch City is concerned. Mr. Speaker, new clauses 22A and 22H set out the process for outline plans for Christchurch City District and for the red zone, and they include the need for a clear statement of intentions and scope, timeframes, opportunities for public engagement, how the costs are to be met, very important consideration, and a proponent must seek the views of its partners, and Regenerate Christchurch must get the consent of Otakaro Limited as the landowner, but Otakaro cannot refuse, quote, except for reasons that are consistent with the purposes of the Act. So there I think that there is an appropriate balance between all of the objectives that are required. Mr. Speaker, I also want to mention new clauses 22J, which sets out the requirements prerequisite to ministerial approval. I think this is a very important new provision. There must be a recommendation by Regeneration Christchurch for a plan for Christchurch District, and that must contain advice, a statement of the views of the other partners, and also advice on how such views have been considered and addressed. And, Mr. Speaker, there are similar requirements elsewhere for approvals and amendments and, of course, for revocations, which include a requirement for Regenerate Christchurch to review and make recommendations to the Minister. So effectively, it is going to be Regenerate Christchurch which leads and which advises, and it won't effectively, in my view, be the Minister who really makes the decision. His function, I think, is going to be relatively formal, and the grounds upon which he could refuse would be very limited. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot more in the bill, many other changes, but one of the most important ones in the bill are clause 97, which specifies the roles of the City Council and the Minister to oversee and manage the interests of both in Regenerate Christchurch. And that means there will have to be joint responsibility and commitment of resources, as there should be. And in clause 97A, there may be a letter of expectations along those lines, and I hope that there will be, because that's a very good way of setting out how that joint responsibility will be met. Finally, Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure to see a consensus on what is going to be a very good bill and a very important bill for the future of Christchurch City and its people. I think it will ensure a robust process focusing on regeneration rather than just recovery, and which properly balances speedy redevelopment, which is much in need, with the wider public interest, especially for an excellent environment and for hoped-for public recreation facilities. Mr. Speaker, it's going to be a pleasure to support the bill.